He accidentally captured an Apache girl with his trap. She feared he'd harm her, but instead The sun had just begun to rise over the dusty hills of the Arizona Territory, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. John adjusted the worn leather strap of his satchel, feeling the weight of his tools and small supplies as he walked along the narrow trail. It was early spring and the air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the distant forest and the faint, earthy smell of the river that wound through the valley. The land was quiet except for the occasional chirping of birds and the rustle of small animals scurrying through the dry grass. For John, mornings like this were peaceful, almost magical, even though life on the frontier was never easy. He had been living in this territory for several years. His family had moved here seeking a new start, away from the crowded towns and the noise of cities. The land was harsh. The sun could scorch the skin in summer, and the winters could freeze even the strongest hands. But there was freedom here, freedom to roam, to hunt, to provide for his family in ways that were impossible back home. And that's what John did. From sunrise to sunset, he set traps for rabbits, squirrels, and other small animals, which were not only a source of food, but also sometimes fur to trade at the local settlement. That morning, John followed his usual route, checking each trap with practiced care. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the ground for movement, his ears alert for any unusual sound. The traps were simple but effective. Small loops of rope hidden carefully under leaves or grass, positioned along animal trails. He knew the land and its creatures well. Sometimes, when he paused to rest, he would lean against a tree and watch the sunlight dance through the branches, feeling a strange connection to the quiet world around him. As he reached the edge of a small clearing, John noticed something that made him freeze. One of his traps had something caught in it, but it wasn't a rabbit or a fox. It was a human figure. A young girl no older than 12, tangled and frightened. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her body shook as she tried to pull free. She had dark hair that fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and her small hands were scratched from struggling. John's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen anyone from the Apache tribes up close, and he knew they were wary of settlers, sometimes fiercely so. For a moment, John was unsure what to do. He had never meant to harm anyone. His traps were meant only for animals. But here, in the middle of the wilderness, he realized the seriousness of the situation. The girl's fear was visible in every tense movement, every tear that slipped down her cheek. She probably thought he was going to hurt her, or worse. The stories he had heard about frontier life, the mistrust and the occasional violence between settlers and native tribes, raced through his mind. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself before he approached. Slowly, he knelt down beside the trap, keeping his hands visible so she would see he wasn't a threat. "It's okay," he said gently, in the softest voice he could manage. "I won't hurt you, I promise." The girl flinched and pulled back, her small body coiled like a spring ready to bolt. John could see the fear in her eyes, and he realized words alone might not be enough. He needed to show her through his actions that he was different from what she feared. He carefully examined the trap, making sure to loosen it without causing her pain. "Almost there," he whispered. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, so she could see he was being careful. As he worked, he noticed the bruises on her arms and the dirt smeared across her cheeks. She had clearly been running through the rough terrain for some time, and the trap had only added to her exhaustion and fear. He felt a pang of guilt. This was an accident, yes, but it was a serious one. After several tense minutes, he managed to free her. She fell back a little, sitting on the ground, still trembling. John didn't move too close, but he kept a respectful distance, offering her a small canteen of water. "Here, he said softly. "You must be thirsty." She looked at the canteen with suspicion, but her thirst won out. Slowly she took it, her hands shaking, and drank in small, careful sips. John watched her, noticing the way she looked around nervously, as if expecting someone, her family, her tribe, to come rushing in at any moment. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently, trying again to communicate through kindness. The girl didn't answer, only shook her head slightly, her dark eyes wary and alert. John realized that gaining her trust would not be easy. She had been taught, no doubt, to be cautious, to fear outsiders. He had to be patient. He had to show her that he could be trusted without forcing her to speak or act against her instincts. For a few moments, the two of them sat in silence. The morning sun warmed the clearing, the wind stirred the grass, and the world seemed to hold its breath. John thought about how fragile life could be here in the wilderness, how one small mistake, a trap set carelessly, a wrong step, could change everything. And yet, here was a chance to make a different kind of impact, a chance to help someone instead of causing harm. After a while, John spoke again. "I'll help you get home," he said. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're safe." The girl's eyes flickered at this, a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. She didn't speak, but she didn't run either. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. John smiled faintly, understanding that trust could not be forced. It had to grow slowly, like a plant pushing through the soil toward the sun. He thought about what might happen next. Her tribe could be nearby, and she could be missing from them already. He didn't know what they would think of him or how they would react, but he knew he couldn't abandon her. The wilderness was dangerous. Predators, the elements, and the unforgiving terrain could all threaten a young girl alone. He would have to lead her carefully, quietly, and respectfully, making sure every step protected her as much as possible. As he stood, he extended his hand slowly, giving her a choice. She hesitated, then cautiously took it. Her grip was light, almost tentative, but it was enough. John felt a surge of relief. This small gesture, a hand held in trust, meant everything. Together they began to move, slowly, toward the distant hills, where he hoped to find a safe path back to her family. The morning continued to unfold with the soft sounds of nature around them. Birds sang, the wind rustled the leaves, and a deer grazed in the distance, unaware of the unusual pair moving through the clearing. John kept talking softly, telling her about the land, the traps, the small creatures he hunted, not as lessons, but as ways to distract her fear and make her feel safe. Gradually, she began to relax, her steps becoming steadier, her eyes less wide with panic. John realized something important as they walked. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in life was fear itself. The girl had been terrified at first, imagining harm where none was intended. And yet, with patience, understanding, and care, that fear could be eased. Trust could be built, even in the most unlikely circumstances. And for John, this realization was more powerful than any hunt, any trap, any survival skill he had learned in the wilderness. By mid-morning, they reached a small, shaded grove. John stopped and offered her a piece of bread he had packed. She took it hesitantly, nibbling as she watched him. He smiled, not wanting to rush her, not wanting to break the fragile thread of trust they had begun to weave. The world beyond the grove could wait for a moment. Here, in the quiet of the trees, something rare and precious was happening. Two humans from very different worlds were finding a way to connect. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, John felt a mix of relief and determination. The girl was still wary, but she was safe, for now. And he knew that the real challenge was only beginning, getting her back to her family, navigating the land carefully and ensuring that neither of them faced danger along the way. But he was ready. He had made a promise, and in the wilderness, promises were sometimes the only thing that mattered. And so, with the girl walking cautiously beside him, John moved forward into the unknown, guided by patience, respect, and the quiet hope that this unexpected encounter could lead to something meaningful, a story of trust, humanity, and the fragile connections that could exist even in the wildest places. The sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the rugged landscape. John and the young Apache girl moved slowly along a narrow trail winding between low hills and clusters of scrubby bushes. She walked beside him quietly, her dark eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Every bird call, every rustle of leaves seemed to make her flinch. John noticed, but he said nothing, understanding that fear was not something that could be hurried away. It had to be eased with care, patience, and gentle reassurance. John's mind was busy, thinking about the challenges ahead. The territory was vast and untamed. Wolves roamed the distant hills, and poisonous snakes lurked in the undergrowth. The girl was small and fragile, unfamiliar with the dangers of the wilderness. He knew he had to be vigilant, not just for himself, but for her. At the same time, he worried about her tribe. They could be searching for her already. If they thought she was lost or harmed by an outsider, there could be consequences he could not even imagine. "Are you hungry?" he asked softly, keeping his voice calm. The girl looked at him, but did not respond at first. Then, after a long pause, she nodded slightly. John reached into his satchel and handed her a small piece of dried meat and a slice of bread. She took it cautiously, nibbling at the edges before taking a more confident bite. He smiled, silently encouraging her. Small gestures like this were more than just food. They were symbols of care and safety. As they moved forward, John noticed her eyes constantly darting to the surrounding hills. "Do you see something?" he asked gently. She shook her head, but her grip on his hand tightened. He understood. Her tribe may have taught her to watch for danger at all times. She could not yet know that he meant her no harm. He walked a little slower, letting her set the pace, and tried to distract her with small talk. "The hills are beautiful today," he said. "Do you see the river in the distance? It shines like silver in the sunlight." She glanced briefly at the river, and for a moment her expression softened. It was subtle, a flicker of curiosity, almost a smile, but it was enough to give John hope. Trust was growing, however slowly, and that was important. He could see that she was beginning to understand that he was not a threat. But he also knew this fragile trust could be broken in an instant if either of them made a mistake. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed a small ridge. Loose rocks crunched under their feet, and the girl stumbled once, catching herself on John's arm. "Careful," he said gently, steadying her without pulling too hard. She nodded, but said nothing. He understood that she was learning to rely on him, but only cautiously. That was fine. He had no intention of rushing her. The wilderness did not reward impatience. As the day passed, the sun rose higher and the shadows grew shorter. They rested under the shade of a large oak tree near a small stream. The girl sat quietly, her knees drawn to her chest, watching the water trickle over smooth stones. John knelt nearby, removing his worn boots to let his tired feet rest. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the ache in his legs, but he pushed it aside. The girl's safety mattered more than his discomfort. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "We'll need to find a safe place for the night," he said softly. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "Night," she repeated, as if the word itself was unfamiliar. John realized she might not have spent much time alone in the wild or away from her family. "Yes," he said gently, We need to find a place where we can rest and be safe until morning." The girl hesitated, then nodded. She trusted him enough to follow his lead, but not enough to speak freely. John respected that. He began scanning the area, looking for a small clearing with good visibility and natural protection. After a short walk, he found a spot surrounded by low bushes and a few sturdy trees. The location was hidden from view but had an open area in front, so they could see anyone approaching. He motioned for her to sit, and she did so quietly, still wary but willing to follow his instructions. As evening approached, the forest grew quieter. The birds had stopped singing and the wind rustled softly through the leaves. John started a small fire, careful to keep it low and controlled so as not to draw attention. The girl watched him, her eyes reflecting both fear and fascination. She had never seen a fire started this way, without a spark from flint and steel, and she seemed to understand that it was both useful and dangerous. John spoke softly while tending the fire. "The night can be scary, but fire keeps us safe. Wolves and other animals won't come near if there is fire." She nodded, still silent, but she leaned slightly closer to the warmth. He handed her another piece of bread and some dried meat. She took it, eating slowly. For a moment the tension seemed to ease. John thought that perhaps she was beginning to feel that this stranger was truly her ally, but the sense of safety was short-lived. From the ridge above, John noticed movement, shapes moving through the trees. He froze, watching carefully. The shapes were not animals. They were human. Scouts? Members of her tribe? Or someone else entirely? His heart pounded. If they were looking for the girl, she could be in danger again. He motioned for her to stay low, and she immediately crouched behind a bush, eyes wide with fear. John knew he had to act carefully. Any sudden movement, any loud sound, could alarm whoever was watching and put the girl at risk. He whispered to her, "Stay calm. Don't make a sound." Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. He studied the figures from his hiding spot. They were moving slowly, scanning the ground, as if searching for something. John realized they might be scouts from her tribe. They had not seen her yet, and he needed to keep it that way. He thought quickly. The terrain sloped gently to one side, where a small cluster of rocks created a natural barrier. If they moved quietly and carefully, they could slip away without being seen. He held out his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it. Together they moved slowly, crouching low, stepping carefully on soft earth to avoid snapping twigs. Each movement required focus and patience. The slightest noise could change everything. By the time they reached the rocks, the figures above had moved past, their attention elsewhere. The girl exhaled quietly, leaning against John for a brief moment. He didn't pull away, but kept his hand firm around hers, letting her feel the security he could provide. They stayed behind the rocks for a while, listening. Eventually, the sounds faded, and John decided it was safe to move again. The night deepened, and the stars emerged, twinkling brightly in the clear sky. John and the girl continued their slow journey, now guided by the faint silver light of the moon. She had begun to relax slightly, trusting that he would not lead her into danger. Her small hand remained in his, no longer trembling as much. For John, this small gesture was everything. It meant she was beginning to believe in him. By the time they reached a small clearing suitable for a longer rest, John felt exhausted but relieved. The girl sat quietly beside him, leaning against a tree trunk. He covered her lightly with a blanket he carried, careful not to smother her. "Sleep now," he whispered. "You need your strength. Tomorrow we continue, and we'll find your home." She nodded, her eyes slowly closing as the weight of exhaustion overtook her fear. John stayed awake a little longer, watching the fire and listening to the soft sounds of the night. He reflected on the day, the unexpected encounter, the fear in her eyes, the small but meaningful trust they had begun to build. He knew that the journey ahead would be even more challenging. Returning her safely to her family would not be easy. There would be obstacles, dangers, and moments of uncertainty. But he also knew that patience, respect, and kindness could guide them through. As the fire burned low and the night grew colder, John felt a quiet sense of purpose. He had stumbled upon a situation he never imagined, yet he was determined to do what was right. The girl's life, her trust, and her safety were now in his hands. And as he watched the stars, he silently promised himself that he would not fail her. The night passed quietly, the wilderness around them alive but not threatening. When dawn approached, John felt the weight of both relief and anticipation. Another day would bring new challenges, but the bond they had begun to form would help them face it together. The girl stirred slightly, her dark eyes meeting his. For the first time, she spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "Thank you." John smiled gently, feeling a warmth in his chest. It was a small word, but it carried more meaning than he could express. It was a sign that, despite the fear and uncertainty, a bridge had begun to form between them. A bridge built not of words alone, but of trust, care, and shared experience. And as the morning light spread across the land, he knew that the journey ahead, though difficult, could be faced with courage, patience, and hope. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the hills, casting a soft golden light across the land. John stirred from his sleep carefully so as not to wake the young Apache girl beside him. She was still wrapped in the blanket, her small form curled up as if trying to shield herself from the cold morning air. He smiled gently, feeling a mix of relief and responsibility. Yesterday had been exhausting both for him and for her, but they had survived. Today, the real challenge would begin, moving closer to her home without attracting unwanted attention. He knelt beside the fire and adjusted the embers to rekindle a small flame. The warmth would give them comfort, and perhaps a small sense of safety. "We need to be careful today," he whispered softly. The girl stirred, her dark eyes blinking up at him. For the first time in a long while, she did not look afraid. Instead, there was a quiet curiosity, an awareness that this man, the stranger, was not like the others she had been taught to fear. After giving her a piece of bread and some dried meat, John stood and motioned for her to follow. They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows of the trees and the folds of the hills. John could see the girl's eyes scanning the surroundings, noting every rustle and movement. She had learned to survive in the wilderness, and he respected that. He didn't want to take away her instincts, only to guide them in a safer direction. As they climbed a gentle ridge, John noticed something in the distance, a small column of smoke rising from behind a stand of trees. His heart quickened. Could it be a settlement? Or perhaps members of her tribe cooking a meal near their camp? Either way, it was a sign that people were nearby, and it meant they needed to be extra careful. He crouched behind a boulder and whispered, "Stay close and stay quiet." She obeyed instantly, her small hand slipping into his. They moved forward slowly, pausing whenever a sound drifted through the air. The girl's breathing was quiet but tense, and John could feel her nervous energy. He did his best to keep her calm. "We're safe," he murmured. "I won't let anyone hurt you." She didn't respond with words, but the way she stayed close to him was enough. It was a small victory, but it meant everything in this moment. The forest grew denser as they continued. Trees stretched high, their branches interlacing to create a canopy that filtered the sunlight. The ground was uneven, with hidden roots and rocks that could trip an unsuspecting traveler. John led carefully, placing each footstep where it would not make a sound, and checking the path ahead for obstacles. The girl followed silently, trusting him to guide her. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the quiet, the snapping of a branch underfoot. Both of them froze. John's heart pounded. He scanned the area, but there was no immediate danger, just a deer that had startled at their approach and bounded away through the trees. The girl exhaled softly, and he gently squeezed her hand. "It's all right," he whispered. "Nothing to worry about." But John knew that danger was never far in the wilderness. Even a small mistake could have serious consequences. He needed to be vigilant, not only for their physical safety, but for the trust he had worked so hard to build. Any sudden threat could make her fear him again, undoing all the progress of the past 2 days. They reached a narrow ravine, a deep cut in the earth, formed by centuries of rainwater. The sides were steep, and the rocks were loose, making the descent tricky. John went first, carefully testing each foothold. The girl followed, trembling slightly, but mirroring his movements. One misstep could mean a fall, but John's careful guidance helped her navigate the rock safely. Once they reached the bottom, the landscape opened up into a small valley. The grass was greener here, and a stream ran through the center, glinting in the morning sunlight. For a brief moment, the girl stopped and gazed at the water, her eyes reflecting wonder and relief. John smiled faintly, noticing her small smile, a sign that she was beginning to feel a little more at ease in his presence. But the sense of calm was fleeting. From across the valley, John spotted movement, 3 figures moving cautiously through the trees. He immediately crouched behind a rock and signaled for the girl to do the same. She pressed herself close, fear flickering across her face. John whispered, "Stay very still. Don't make a sound." Her hand gripped his tightly, her small body trembling, but she obeyed. John studied the figures carefully. They were clearly humans, moving with purpose, scanning the ground and the surrounding trees. They could be scouts from her tribe, or they could be strangers. Either way, they were a threat if they discovered the girl. John's mind raced. He needed a plan, and quickly. They could not fight, and they could not outrun everyone if discovered. They would need to rely on caution, stealth, and their knowledge of the terrain. He spotted a narrow, winding path along the edge of the stream that led up into a thicket of trees. If they moved slowly and quietly, they could avoid being seen. John took a deep breath and whispered, "We can go this way. Follow me, carefully." The girl nodded, and together, they began the slow journey. Each step required concentration and balance. The girl's small hand remained in his, giving her courage and guidance. As they moved, John kept talking softly, trying to keep her calm. "We're almost past them," he murmured. "Just a little further and we'll be safe," she whispered back softly. "I trust you." John's heart warmed. Trust was fragile, but it was growing, step by careful step. He realized that the bond between them was more than just necessity. It was human connection, a bridge across fear and difference. After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, they reached the thicket. They crouched among the thick bushes, hiding from view. From their vantage point, they could see the figures move past, not noticing them. The girl exhaled slowly, relief washing over her face. John smiled faintly, but he knew they were not yet out of danger. This was only a temporary reprieve. The valley was quiet once more, but John understood that the real challenge was not avoiding strangers. It was keeping the girl's trust intact. She had been through fear and uncertainty, and now she was beginning to rely on him. Any misstep, any harsh word, could undo the fragile bond they had begun to form. He needed to remain patient, calm, and respectful, no matter what the wilderness threw at them. As they rested briefly in the thicket, John took out a small piece of bread and handed it to her. "Eat," he said softly. She took it, chewing slowly, her eyes watching him carefully. He understood that she was beginning to feel safe enough to eat, a small but meaningful sign. Trust was building, step by careful step, and he was determined not to let it falter. The journey continued, and the terrain grew more challenging. They crossed shallow streams, climbed rocky slopes, and navigated dense clusters of trees. Each obstacle tested their patience, their balance, and their resolve. The girl stumbled a few times, but John was always there to steady her, to guide her, to reassure her. And each time her trust in him grew a little more. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking a larger valley. John could see the signs of a settlement in the distance, small fires, smoke rising, and faint movement of people. His heart raced. This could be her village, but it could also be dangerous. They needed to approach carefully, ensuring that the girl would not be frightened or put at risk. John crouched and spoke softly. "We're almost there. Stay close. We'll move slowly, and you'll be safe." The girl nodded, her small hand slipping into his once more. Together, they began the cautious descent into the valley, each step measured, each movement deliberate. The turning point of their journey was near. The girl had survived fear, uncertainty, and danger, but the real test of trust and courage was just beginning. Every rustle of the wind, every bird call felt louder now, as if the valley itself was holding its breath. John guided the girl carefully, knowing that the decisions he made now could determine whether they succeeded or faced peril. The turning point of their story was here, in the delicate balance of trust, courage, and patience. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, John realized that the most important part of their journey was not the distance they traveled, but the bond they had forged along the way. The valley stretched out before John and the young Apache girl, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. From this height, John could see the small village where the girl's family might be. Smoke curled lazily from several hearths, and tiny figures moved among the huts, tending to daily chores. Relief warmed his chest, but he knew better than to let his guard down. The journey had been long, and danger was still very real. One misstep now could undo everything. He crouched behind a low bush, glancing back at the girl. Her small frame was tense, and her dark eyes were wide with apprehension. She had been quiet for most of the day, absorbing every word, every gesture, every movement that could guide them safely. John could feel her trust in him, but he also knew how fragile it still was. One wrong move could ignite fear again. He whispered softly, "We're very close. I'll help you get to your family safely. Stay calm and follow me." The girl nodded, gripping his hand tightly. She had begun to realize that he truly meant no harm, but instinct and past experience kept her cautious. John understood. Fear did not disappear quickly. It needed proof. That proof, he hoped, would come in the next few minutes. The path to the village was open, but it was also visible from the ridge where they now crouched. Any sudden movement could alert watchers, and the girl's family, or strangers, might react unpredictably. John scanned the area carefully. The people in the village appeared unaware of their presence, but he knew they had to move slowly and deliberately. He took a deep breath and began leading the girl down the slope, stepping cautiously over loose stones and tufts of grass. Halfway down, a sudden shout rang out from the village below. Both John and the girl froze. The girl's eyes filled with fear and her small body trembled. John's mind raced. Had someone spotted them? Was it a friend? Or a potential threat? He lowered his voice to a whisper. Stay very still. Don't make a sound. We'll wait until they calm down. They crouched behind a bush, holding their breath as the shouting continued for a few tense moments before fading. John could not see exactly what had caused it, but the immediate danger appeared to have passed. He glanced at the girl. She was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. But she had not panicked or fled. That was a sign of growing trust. And John felt a surge of hope. Carefully, he guided her down the remaining slope. Their movements were slow and deliberate, but with each step, the girl seemed to grow slightly more confident. The rhythm of their progress was steady, 1 foot forward, then another. Pause, glance around, continue. The wilderness had been unpredictable, but now, as they approached the village, the unknown was human, and human reactions were often more unpredictable than animals or terrain. When they reached the base of the ridge, John paused. The village was now only a short distance away, but so was the risk. Someone could notice them, and a single misstep could trigger panic or conflict. He crouched and turned to the girl. Almost there, he whispered. We'll move slowly. You don't need to be afraid anymore. Just follow me. Her small hand squeezed his, a silent promise that she would trust him. Together they moved forward, stepping carefully through the grass and low bushes. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold. John used the fading light to their advantage, letting shadows obscure their movements. Suddenly, from the edge of the village, a figure appeared. A young boy, perhaps no older than the girl. He ran toward them, shouting. Fear gripped the girl, and she froze in place, her small body pressed against John. It's okay, John whispered. Don't move. Stay calm. The boy stopped a short distance away, staring at them with wide eyes. Then, recognizing the girl, he ran toward her, and she instinctively took a small step forward. John lowered himself slightly, staying in the shadows, but letting the reunion happen naturally. The girl and the boy embraced, their relief clear even from a distance. John watched silently, respecting the moment. But the celebration was brief. From the village, several adults emerged, moving quickly toward them. The girl's mother ran forward, fear and worry etched on her face. The girl's body tensed again. John stepped slightly forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. I mean no harm, he called softly, his voice calm and steady. The adults stopped, eyeing him cautiously. The girl's mother approached him slowly, her eyes searching his face for signs of danger. John stayed still, showing no sudden movements, no threats. Slowly, she reached the girl and pulled her close, speaking softly in a language John did not understand. The girl clung to her mother, tears flowing freely, but she did not look afraid of John anymore. One of the elders stepped forward, speaking firmly but without aggression. John shook his head, using gestures to indicate he had not hurt the girl. The tension in the air was thick, but slowly the elder's expressions softened. They could see the care he had shown, the patience and the gentleness. No harm had been done. John felt a mix of relief and nervousness. He had completed the most dangerous part of the journey, but he was still in unfamiliar territory. The girl's family surrounded her now, offering her comfort, and John remained slightly back, respectful of their space. The girl looked at him, a small smile breaking through her tears. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, and now she knew he had guided her safely. The elders studied him quietly, assessing whether he was friend or foe. John held their gaze with honesty and humility, silently communicating that his only intention had been to help. After a tense pause, the mother spoke again, this time with a softer tone. She reached out to John, placing a small bundle of food in his hands, a gesture of gratitude and trust. John nodded, accepting it humbly. The girl clung to her mother for a while, glancing back at John occasionally. Finally, she took a small step toward him, placing her hand briefly in his as if to say thank you. John felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. He had risked the wilderness, patience, and courage, and in return, he had earned trust, safety, and human connection. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, John prepared to leave. The elders and adults gave him respectful nods, acknowledging his help and care. The girl's mother offered a final gesture, a soft touch on his arm, a word in her language, and a small, understanding smile. John nodded, understanding the meaning. He was trusted, and the girl was safe. Walking away from the village, John reflected on the day. The dangers had been real, the tension high, but he had faced them with patience, care, and courage. He had learned something important. That trust was fragile, yet powerful. It could guide people through fear and uncertainty, and even in moments of great danger, it could create bridges between worlds that seemed separate. By the time John reached the outskirts of the forest, the night had fallen completely. The stars twinkled above, and the cool air carried the soft sounds of nocturnal life. He paused, looking back in the direction of the village. The girl and her family were safe. The bond of trust had been honored, and he had fulfilled his promise. A sense of quiet satisfaction washed over him. John knew the wilderness would continue to test him, and that danger could arise at any time, but he also knew the value of compassion, patience, and respect. The girl had trusted him with her life, and he had honored that trust. In return, he had received something equally precious, the knowledge that courage and care could guide people through even the most uncertain and frightening moments. As he moved into the forest heading back toward his own home, John felt a deep sense of peace. The day had been long, the journey difficult, and the risks had been real. But in the end, humanity, trust, and courage had prevailed. And for John, that was the greatest reward of all, a reminder that even in a world full of fear, connection, and kindness could create light where darkness once ruled. The night had passed quietly, and the first light of dawn filtered softly through the trees. John stirred gently, taking a deep breath and feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. The sounds of the wilderness greeted him. Birds chirping, a soft breeze rustling the leaves, and the distant trickle of a stream. The journey to return the young Apache girl to her family had been completed, and now he felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and quiet pride. As he walked along the familiar trail back toward his own home, he thought about the girl, her small, dark eyes, and the trust she had placed in him. She had been scared at first, trembling with fear at the very sight of him, yet over the past days, she had begun to believe that he was there to help, not harm. That trust had been fragile, easily broken, yet it had grown stronger with each careful step, each gentle word, and each act of patience. John understood something profound. In life, trust was not given freely. It had to be earned, nurtured, and protected. His mind wandered back to the moment they had first stumbled upon each other. She had been trapped in the simple mechanism he had set for rabbits, and for a brief moment, fear had ruled the day. But what could have been a moment of panic and danger had transformed into something much greater. Through patience and care, John had guided her through fear, uncertainty, and peril, and in return, He had witnessed the remarkable resilience of a young child learning to trust again. The girl's family had treated him with a mixture of caution and gratitude. Their eyes had watched him closely, seeking signs of danger or deception, yet in the end, they had recognized his kindness. They had offered food, water, and gestures of thanks, subtle yet meaningful in their culture. John had accepted with humility, understanding that he was a guest in their world, and that respect and care were the only proper ways to interact. The experience had taught him that courage was not always about strength or skill, but about honesty, patience, and empathy. As he continued his walk, John recalled the moment of reunion between the girl and her mother. Her mother's face had been filled with worry, the lines of years and hardship evident in her expression, yet beneath it was gratitude and relief. The girl had clung to her mother, finally feeling the safety and warmth of home. John had remained a respectful distance away, allowing the family to embrace and protect their own. Yet he could feel the silent acknowledgement of his role in bringing them back together. That acknowledgement was quiet, unspoken, yet deeply felt. John thought about the journey itself, the climbing of ridges, the careful navigation through dense forests, the hidden paths, and the quiet pauses behind rocks and bushes. Each step had been deliberate, guided by the need to protect the girl and ensure her safety. The wilderness had tested him, demanding patience, foresight, and quick thinking. Every rustling leaf, every distant shadow, had carried potential danger. Yet through it all, John had learned that the greatest strength was not speed or skill, but the ability to remain calm, to think clearly, and to act with care. He also thought about the girl herself. She had faced fear that few children ever experience, yet she had adapted and survived with remarkable courage. At first, she had been frozen by terror, her trust withheld as instinct and past experience guided her reactions. But slowly, with gentle guidance, she had begun to move with confidence, follow his lead, and even communicate in small ways. Her courage had grown alongside his, each step forward a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the human spirit. John admired her deeply, understanding that the bond they had formed was rare and precious. The memory of the village, of the elders, and of the final reunion lingered in his mind. The adults had approached him cautiously, their expressions unreadable at first, but their perception had shifted as they saw the care he had taken, the patience he had shown, and the respect he had given. Trust had been built not through words alone, but through action, through showing that he could be relied upon to protect and not harm. That lesson stayed with him. Actions carried more weight than words, and respect must always be earned. Walking through the forest, John paused at a quiet stream. He knelt beside it, letting the cool water run over his hands, and reflected on the journey as a whole. Life on the frontier was full of unpredictability. There were dangers at every turn. Wild animals, harsh weather, and the unknown movements of other people. Yet it was also full of opportunities to act with kindness, to build trust, and to make a positive difference. This journey, though unexpected, had reminded him of what truly mattered: the courage to act with integrity, and the patience to care for others, even in difficult circumstances. John also thought about the lessons of empathy. The girl had been terrified because of her experiences, her upbringing, and the stories she had heard about settlers, yet she had responded to kindness and patience. Her fear had been replaced with cautious trust, and that trust had guided her through danger. John understood that empathy was not merely feeling for someone else. It was acting in a way that acknowledges their fears, needs, and humanity. That realization deepened his understanding of human connection. As he continued walking, John noticed the familiar landmarks of his own homestead in the distance. The sun was now higher in the sky, and the day was bright and clear. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had helped someone in need, honored a fragile trust, and witnessed courage in its purest form. The girl's life had been changed, and in a quiet but meaningful way, so had his. He realized that life on the frontier was not only about survival but also about compassion, understanding, and the bonds we form with others. When he finally reached his home, John felt the exhaustion in his body, yet his spirit was lifted. He set down his pack and sat for a moment, thinking about what had happened. The girl's journey, their shared moments of fear and trust, and the ultimate reunion with her family had all left an indelible mark on him. He understood that the wilderness was not just a test of physical skill but a mirror of human character, revealing courage, patience, and empathy in the face of uncertainty. In the days that followed, John often reflected on the experience. He shared the story carefully with his family, speaking of the girl's courage, the importance of trust, and the way patience and care could guide people through fear. The lessons were clear. Trust was fragile but powerful. Courage could take many forms, and kindness could create connections that transcended fear and difference. The girl, too, had left an impression on him. Her resilience and quiet determination reminded him that even the smallest among us could face great challenges and emerge stronger. He often thought about her smiles, her cautious trust, and the way she had leaned on him when she needed guidance. That memory was a source of quiet strength for John, a reminder of what it meant to act with integrity and compassion in the world. John realized that life on the frontier, while harsh and unpredictable, could also offer moments of profound human connection. The journey with the girl had shown him that even in a world full of danger and fear, trust, empathy, and courage could guide people to safety and understanding. He knew that he would carry these lessons with him for the rest of his life, applying them in small ways every day. As the sun set over his homestead, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John sat quietly on the porch. He thought of the girl, her family, and the journey that had changed them all. The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm and peace. The world was vast, unpredictable, and sometimes frightening, but it was also full of opportunities to act with kindness, to build trust, and to witness courage. In the end, John understood that the greatest reward of all was not recognition nor fame nor wealth. It was the knowledge that he had helped someone in need, that he had honored their trust, and that he had contributed to a moment of safety, courage, and connection. That understanding filled him with quiet satisfaction, a sense of fulfillment that no danger or hardship could diminish. And so, as night fell and stars twinkled in the clear sky, John reflected on the journey with gratitude. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, yet he had emerged with a deeper understanding of trust, courage, and empathy. The young girl had returned safely to her family, their lives forever touched by this unexpected encounter. And John knew that in a world full of challenges, the power of patience, kindness, and understanding would always guide those willing to act with care. He whispered softly to himself, almost as a promise, "No matter what comes, I will remember this. I will act with patience, kindness, and courage. I will honor trust, and I will help whenever I can." And with that thought, he stood, feeling the weight of responsibility, courage, and hope settle warmly in his heart. The journey had ended, but the lessons would last a lifetime.